Hey, how's it going? I'm Derek Kirk of Effectatron, and today I'm going to be talking about Redshift camera tips, as well as just some camera tips in general as far as how to use them, what focal lengths to use, how to set them up, and the differences and things that you can do and how to control them easily. And we're not going to cover everything about Redshift cameras because there is a whole lot to cover. Like, for example, to start off, there are several types of Redshift cameras. So we've got the cameras tag here, and we've got standard, which is what we're going to be talking about today, as well as how to set up a shortcut so that when you do click the Redshift camera, you actually come in with the Redshift camera tag rather than this option here, which doesn't do that for you, which is really annoying. Also, we have fisheye, which is kind of that 90s skateboarder look. Spherical is a 360 image that does not have any 3D. So if you put it in a VR headset, it's not going to have any depth to it. It's just going to be a flat image. This is going to be something that you could use for like AR or something on the phone. Cylindrical is going to give you a 180-degree field of view, both horizontally and vertically. So basically you can see everything in front of the camera, but nothing behind it. And then stereoscopic spherical is going to be that 360 all the way around horizontally and vertically. And it's going to have 3D depth via parallax. So if you're going to do something for a VR headset that you want to be able to render out a cool image or an animation that you can look around in and it actually has 3D depth through the headset, this is the kind of render you're going to want to do. So let me know if you want to know more about these in the comments below, because I definitely will cover these. And I'll also cover each of these in depth inside of the Redshift lighting and rendering masterclass that is coming soon. So be sure to have notifications on so that you know when that becomes available. Okay, so we're going to talk about the standard camera first. So let's get into it. So we're using the real-time renderer right now. So it's pretty cool that we get this real-time feedback. I've used it a little bit more than normal lately, but the cool thing is like this actually works really well to preview depth of field. Now there are some limitations of it that the IPR does not have, and we'll cover that in just a second. So what we need to do is add a camera. Now the bad thing is if we go down here and we hit standard camera, it brings in a standard camera, but it doesn't bring the Redshift tag with it. So basically this is not a Redshift camera, which is useless. So what we want to do is we can add that camera, right click, go to camera tags, and then add a Redshift camera if we want. You can create a camera from some other scene and make it have all the Redshift controls that you want available. Or what we can do is go into the window customization command manager, and we're going to look up standard. And here we have standard, which is not called camera, it's not called anything, it's just called standard. And we're going to set up a hotkey for that, and I used Alt-3 and assign that. Okay, so now when I'm over here and I say Alt-3, it creates a Redshift camera along with a Redshift camera tag for me. So I don't have to skip that. I can skip that step and I don't have to right click and go into the tag. So there's tip number one. Be sure to set up a hotkey for the standard. It's not called camera. So if you go in here looking for camera, you're not going to find it. It's just called standard. So use that hotkey to create your camera. That way you already get that tag on there for you. Now, a couple other things to control. Obviously, we have a focal length, field of view, all these things, focus distance. And then we have this Redshift camera tag down here, and this is what's going to be most important. And the cool thing with Redshift is it uses these values in conjunction with these values. So you actually can set up your cameras how you normally do, and then use Redshift to use that information to drive it. So firstly, let's talk about cameras really quickly and just talk about the object here and focal length. So with focal length, it defaults to 36, which is kind of interesting because most of the time if you're using cameras and stuff on set, you're not going to use a 36mm lens, you're going to use a 35mm lens. So 35 is pretty good, and that's your decent kind of interview lens. But most of the time, if you really want to have more of the most natural lens that's the closest to the eyeball and what you actually see, that's going to be your 50mm lens. So you can type in 50. And you can see that's going to tighten this up. And if we look at this, you can see the spread of this is displayed here. So 35 is a wider spread, so we're getting a wider angle. 50 is a tighter angle. And 50 is going to be, when you see interviews and stuff on TV that have this really nice depth of field and stuff, that's almost always a 50. Now, if you're doing a product or a logo or something, animation, and you're looking at it and it seems a little distorted, like it's sort of stretched wide, like if you put the 2D image of your logo over top of it, it doesn't quite line up. That's because of lens distortion. So basically, if you want to do anything without having any kind of lens distortion, you're just going to need to have a longer lens. the longer the lens, the less distortion there's going to be. So if you want to do like a product shot, like you're doing something for Amazon or something, and you have like a chair that you've modeled or whatever, you're doing it for this company, and you don't want to have any distortion, you're probably going to want to go all the way up to 120, if not more, to create this. And you can see how that's really shrunken down our field of view here. So now all we need to do is we can hit E and just back that up till we see everything in our frame here. So here's everything at 120. Let me just quickly set up a couple different camera angles here so we can see the difference and see what I'm talking about. Okay, so I've set up the most common camera angles here, and you can see that we're going closer and closer with the wider camera angle to get the same kind of framing that we have here. We basically just want this green cube to be right on the edge and the purple to be on the edge over here. So this is the 120. You can see everything fits nicely in our scene. We've got our wall filling out perfectly. Everything is looking pretty good. We're going to go into a 85mm lens. And these are just, if you don't know what millimeter lens to do, it's better to look up lenses and like prime kits, cine lenses, whatever you want to do, and use actual lenses that people use. And most of the time when you're doing a lot of stuff that's professional, you're not using a lot of zoom lenses and stuff like that for product shots and stuff like that. You're using locked focal length lenses that are just going to have that better image for you. So you're going to want to stay around 24, 35, 50, 85, 120, 200, stuff like that. You don't really want to have a focal length of like 47.35. Like, it's just something about your shot is going to be off. So you want to make sure you use those focal lengths how you want. And you can go in here and they have some presets in here: 50, 80, 135, 300, 15. And so these are interesting because they're not really the most common, but they're fine. What we have here is our 85, and you can see we pushed in there. We're still, we're looking pretty good. Everything's looking pretty good. We can see the difference between those two. See how that stuff moves? Let's go ahead and look at this like this. Looks like we're doing like a push-pull. It's kind of interesting. So let's push in even closer. And so now we've got the 50mm lens. We're getting closer to the edge of our cyc back here, but we're getting a little more distance between our objects here and a little more distortion, as you can see here. So basically, like, you can't see this hoop. This hoop is covered up by this green cube, but at 120, it's clear that this hoop is above this green cube. So keep that in mind when you're doing products and stuff with the way you're aligning things, that you might need a longer focal length. So let's go ahead and go down to 35. And now you can see we've actually can see the edges of our cyc wall, even though we still have our green cube here on the edge of our screen. We've not moved anything except forward in the Z. So you can see how that wide angle is seeing more of the scene here, 120. Kind of cool. So you also could animate going from one camera to the other, and that's pretty cool little zoom look. And then let's go ahead and take a look at 24, which is as wide as I would go if I were you. You could go all the way down to 18 and get an ultra wide kind of GoPro type look if you want. And that's going to really give you a lot of distortion there. So you can see the difference between 18 and 120, quite drastic. Completely different looking image, even though our scene is set up exactly the same. So, play around with different camera effects that you want. Be sure, sometimes it doesn't always have to be changing your scene around. It can just be the type of camera you use to shoot it. So have those presets in mind when using this camera. So that's pretty cool. Now let's talk about using depth of field with Redshift. So in order to enable a depth of field, what we need to do is, instead of our Redshift camera tag, we have this Bokeh tab. And instead of Bokeh is depth of field. Bokeh is what is called when you blur out lights in the background. Those are called bokeh when they have that shape, okay? So we're gonna go ahead and click override and click enable. Okay, and now you can see everything has become extremely out of focus. And we look at our scene here. We've got two ways of visualizing this, okay? We've got our cone here, and this cone is not just like the angle, but this point right here in our cone is actually our focal point. This dot right here is what it is going to focus on. So here we have the focus settings, and we can see we can derive the distance from the focus distance and the COC radius, or we can do just the focus distance, or we can do the focus, or we could do neither. What I like to do is I like to do focus distance. And what this does is this uses the focus distance that we tell our camera here. And then we have the ability to control the COC radius separately, which is basically the ability to control the power of your depth of field and how shallow your depth of field is going to be. So let's go ahead and adjust our focus distance. Now there's two ways we can do this. We can grab this middle dot and just pull it all the way into our scene until our scene comes into focus here. You can see we can have the foreground of our scene in focus with the background being out of focus. Or if we wanted to, what we could do is go back to our Redshift camera, and here underneath here we have the object tab, and this we have focus distance, and we could set up a null and say, okay, we want this null to be our focus object. So no matter where this null is, that is where my focus is going to be. So if I pull my null to the front, it's going to focus more on that. Pull it to the back, it's going to focus on that. So kind of a neat way to control that. And also you could always, have it on a certain object or something if you're seeing. And so that way you can basically lock your focus into an object or something, or do a simple animation where you're animating your null to do a nice little rack focus from the back to the front. So nulls are pretty powerful tools to use that just kind of make it easier to control because it gives you handles for it. Alternatively, we can just go in here and click this eyedropper and then click in our scene what we want to focus on. Like we want to focus on this back pink one, and it's going to focus more on that and change the focus distance here that you can see. Or we could click somewhere like the floor right here and it's going to focus more on that. And you can see how these values are changing. But sometimes it's a little trickier and you can misclick, and I wouldn't recommend doing this all the time, but it does work well, especially with tight shots and things like that. I know I'm kind of throwing these at you, and I'm not really separating them out by saying tip number 1, tip number 2, but I think that's fine. I don't think you guys really care as long as you actually learn the tips. So refresher, what we've covered so far: camera lens, focal length is very important in determining how your scene looks and how it's actually going to be presented, as well as fixing distortion. 2, we figured out how to add the Redshift camera tag quickly by setting up that hotkey, and also how to do it to already existing cameras. And the cool thing is you can add this to the cameras such as the motion capture camera, the camera crane, and the target camera as well. So you can add this tag onto all of those, so that's important to note as well. And then lastly, we figured out once inside the Redshift tag how to enable the bokeh and control the focus distance using the camera. Now, if you don't want to use the camera and you just want to drive it with these numbers here, you totally can. So if you want your focus distance to be 500 centimeters away from your camera all the time, you can do that, but you lose that ability to just click and point easily from the settings here, or to use a null or something like that. So you lose a little bit of flexibility that way. So that's why I like to do the COC. And to go over the COC, let's go ahead and just create a new camera using Alt-3, go into that, and we're just going to zoom in here. We're going to set this to a 50 mil, and we're going to really zoom in here and get inside of our scene here where we have some nice depth here to take a look at some different levels of COC. So what we have going on here is we've got our camera here with a 50 mil, and we want to enable bokeh. Click that, check that, change it from focus distance to only. And what we can do really quickly is go into our camera and choose that. But there's another way we can do this if we're not using our viewport here. Inside of the Redshift render viewer, there's actually a control here for this, but it doesn't work with RT. So let's turn off RT and just use progressive. It works with progressive and bucket rendering. So we have our scene here, and what we can do is use this icon right here, which is the little cube. It says click to focus. So this allows you to adjust both the focal distance and the COC radius at the same time by alt clicking and alt dragging. So we'll click this to enable it, and then we can click on this cylinder here in our scene, and that's going to enable that focus distance to be straight on that point. And now if we hold alt, we can click and drag, and that creates this circle. The bigger the circle, the bigger the COC is going to be, thus creating a way shallower depth of field, and really that's going to blur a lot of stuff really high. So we can see what this does is set our COC to 32, which is really high. This is what you're going to want to do for like macro shots and stuff like that. Click alt and drag, and we can close that circle down and let go, and that's going to lower our COC back down to 1. And so you can see how you can just quickly control all of that and just kind of get some really nice, quick, pretty fast feedback from that. So let's go ahead and just set this to 15. And that's going to really blur out our background a lot for this tight shot. Pretty cool. So now what we can do is, okay, we're like, okay, that's cool, but we want to actually look at this back. We want to be focused on this back object. So we can just click that back object. It's going to swap focus to that back object. Now, the only downside to using it this way is that you can't like keyframe this exactly. So you're better off using, if you're going to do like push pulls and stuff, you can keyframe it here, and then we'll go 24, click here, let it update, keyframe it there. Okay, so that's how you can keyframe using this tool. So now what we'll get is this nice rack focus from one until the other. It's a little slow in the IPR because Bokeh is pretty, actually RT handles it really, really well. So what we can see here is we've got this back object in focus. We'll hit play and we should have a nice shift focus, rack focus, straight up to that close one. So you can see how we have that. Pretty cool. We get that really quick feedback. But you can see how the blur and stuff is pretty clean, but it's also kind of that very video gamey blur that you get. But it works. So pretty cool for that quick feedback to make sure that you can see what's in focus and what's not in focus. And also the cool thing with RT is obviously to go into here with our RT on and we just start moving our camera around, we're going to keep that same depth of field. And so we can get some really cool live feedback and you can get some like nice, looks and stuff and get an idea of where your focal length is away from your camera. And so you can start just messing around with that and getting a feel for COC levels and depth levels and focus distance levels. So again, everything kind of works in like conjunction with each other. COC radius is basically going to say, look, how far do I need to start blurring things away from the surface, right? So how blurry is it going to be? And the power is basically how soon do you need me to implement that COC radius at full strength, So you can see with the COC all the way up to 100, we're really losing, it's almost too much going on. So lower that back down and you can see we've got sort of this nice cleaner image there. And again, keyframe. And again, we can just click, keyframe that, and there we go. We can focus on this object here. Also, we can come in here with the Redshift camera tag and we can load in a bokeh image. Now, if you want to do this, you should probably Google bokeh image. If we Google bokeh images real quick, you'll see we get all these shapes and things. And if you look at the Redshift tag, that's where we can get this nice, cool multicolor one, which is kind of a cool one that we can play around with. And basically, Grayscale Gorilla has some too, but here's a really good one of just a big list of all kinds of different bokehs and stuff that you can use. So you can see these like hexagonal ones are going to give you more of that, hexagonal shape when the lights blur, like in some of these images, or just we're going to have rounder ones, or we can have longer ones. And you're just going to look at your real world images and see how those are separate. So, you understand it pretty simply, but this one's going to be your best friend to get that cool into the Spider-Verse kind of look. So let's go ahead and just save this image. Let's go ahead and use a bokeh image, load that bokeh image in that we downloaded from the internet. RGB. And what's going to happen is it's going to start splitting that to really give us that cool into the Spider-Verse style effect where the blurrier, it's not just going to get blurry, it's going to start splitting the RGB away from itself. So you're going to get these cool chromatic aberration in whatever is out of focus. So now we can start cranking up that power a bit, or we can start cranking up the depth of that. And we're really going to get a lot of that. So let's go ahead and go for like 20. And we'll go ahead and render this out and take a look at it. You can see how these blurry objects in the background that were out of focus are getting this nice green, yellow, and red split off of them. And we even have it on the very edge of this. And so what's in focus is not split. And then what's out of focus is split. It's a really, really cool effect. Really, you're just going to want to use that for stylistic purposes, but that's pretty cool. So you can load in and look out different images and play around with those. There's a lot of resources available for that. Again, just Google it. So pretty cool. If you didn't know that you could do that, that's a really, really cool one. And also, I'd say the hexagon one is probably a big one, because a lot of times when you're looking at cameras and stuff, like I remember my Canon DSLR lens used to make hexagons versus circles. So it really, you know, it depends on what kind of camera you're trying to match and what kind of look you're going for. So pretty cool. If you liked this video and more content, be sure to check out my other videos. Think about hitting that subscribe button and ringing the bell to be notified. It means a lot for you guys to give me support. And you guys have been fantastic again. And a lot of you have been joining the Discord. It's been amazing to get to talk to you guys and actually get to know some of you. So be sure to check that link. Be sure to click that link below as well. Firstly, I want to say thank you guys so much for the support. You guys have been super supportive over the last month or so since I've been pumping out a lot more content. I've got a lot more subscribers. And to each of you and everybody that got my Gumroad downloads and free materials, check the links below to see those. But thank you guys again for all the support. It really means a lot, and it means a lot for the growth of this channel and me. This is all I do. So it really helps support me in my life, my family. So thank you again. Just really appreciate it, you guys. Be sure to subscribe and ring that bell if you like what you see. Okay. See you next time.